listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Monday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to the show. This is the Intrepid radio program, broadcasting right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. If you're already here, then you know the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. If you're not there, go check out Odyssey Radio, look at the schedule and the lineup, and see all the fantastic stuff that makes up Odyssey Radio. At the same time, if you're just listening, you can come and watch the video simulcast, and the best part, join the live chat room going on right now over on my YouTube channel. And that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over, join the fun over there. If you just want to come and watch the chat room, if you want to kind of listen and join in the conversation that's going on, because there's all kinds of topics get thrown around over there, come on over and join the chat room. If you want to participate, come on over and participate. So voyeur or participant, come on over and join us. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And while you're there, click on the join button right below the window, the video window. And it's over on this side over here, if you're watching the video. You see it already. Hit join. You're going to see 3 ways you can become a member of this program and this channel. So go check it out, see what the perks are, and enjoy yourself. Welcome. So glad you're all here with me tonight. There was a little topic that came up. This is not politics. This is current events. I'm talking about the COVID stuff. I've been going a little bit back and forth, and my wife and I have gone a little bit back and forth on the vaccination stuff. Now, I have found that the vaxxers versus the anti-vaxxers, when it comes to the COVID, tend to follow along these roughly conservative and liberal lines, as you can say, as an overgeneralization. And why is that? Why did it seem to be the maskers were on the left and the non-maskers were on the right? There seemed to be something political that was buoying both sides of that argument. But trying to get that out of the argument, we've been dealing with the big question of, do we vaccinate ourselves and our family and our kids, or do we not? Do we want to wait for a little bit? Do we want to see if it's more tried and true? My older daughters get into vehement conversations with me about this because they think it's a really good thing that we get vaccinated. Now, my daughter Bryn, her husband's dad, so her father-in-law, is a physician out in South Carolina. And he was one of those, I don't know technically what you call it, but he was one of those offices, those practices where he was in on the early testing and distribution of the vaccine. And he and I are going to have a conversation about this stuff. But it's gotten to the place where it's so defensive that I offered up this list to my daughters this morning. I said, this kind of encapsulates some of the questions we have. And they immediately come back, oh, Dad, you're so conspiratorialist, and I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, I've got questions. I want to know things. And so, whoa. So there you go. One of my lights was out. Now my light's on. So I posed these questions, and these are some of the, I believe, legitimate questions that Rainey and I have toward vaccination. And I'm wondering what you guys think of this. And this is the list, and you tell me what you think of it. This is the list that Rainey sent me earlier today, and these are benefits as to why I should be vaccinated. Number 1, can I stop wearing a mask? No, is the answer. Okay, so that's not a benefit. I still have to wear a mask. 2, can they reopen restaurants, etc., and everyone works normally as before COVID hit? Nope. Will I be resistant to COVID? Maybe, but they don't know exactly. It probably won't stop me from getting it. Number 4, at least I won't be contagious to others, right? No. is the answer. I can still pass it on. Maybe. Nobody knows for sure yet. 5. If we vaccinate children, will schools resume normally? No. Now, my kids go to school. They go to public school. The schools are open. But they got to wear a mask 6.5 hours a day. That's not healthy all by itself. School's not normal right now. So, 6, if I'm vaccinated, can I stop social distancing? No, you can't. You still have to social distance. If I'm vaccinated, number 7, can I stop disinfecting my hands every 10 minutes of the day? No, you still have to do that. 8, if I vaccinate myself and my grandpa, can we hug each other? No, according to the legerdemain out there about all this. 9, will movie theaters and stadiums, etc., be reopened thanks to vaccines? No, they won't be. 10, will the vaccinated be able to gather publicly in large groups without masks? No. 11, what's the real benefit to vaccination? Well, the virus won't kill you. 12, are you sure it won't kill me? No, we're not sure of that. 13, if statistically the virus doesn't kill me anyway, why would I get vaccinated? The answer is to protect others. 14, so if I get vaccinated, is everyone sure that I'm not infecting them? The answer is no. So the vaccine doesn't give immunity. It doesn't eliminate the virus. It doesn't prevent death. It doesn't guarantee that you won't get COVID. It doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. It doesn't stop you from passing it on. It doesn't eliminate the need for travel bans. It doesn't eliminate the need for business closures. It doesn't eliminate the need for lockdowns. It doesn't eliminate the need for masks. So the big raging question at the end of all of that is, why should I be vaccinated? If you've got an answer to that, go ahead and put it in the chat room. Talk about that. Now, I'm going to talk to my my daughter's father-in-law. He'd be the other father-in-law in this in my daughter's and my son-in-law's relationship. And we're going to talk. I put in a call to him this morning. He said he'd call me back, and I haven't heard back from him quite yet. He's a busy man, as you can imagine. He says, yeah, let's talk about this, because I said I've got some questions. But one thing I notice is my daughter's automatically on the defensive, automatically on the, oh, you're being a conspiratorialist. Oh, you're over the edge. And I did, no, I have legitimate questions. My wife, Rainey, has some autoimmune stuff with her thyroid. She's afraid to take the vaccine because of the autoimmune stuff. She's heard some bad stuff about that. My daughters will bring up, well, this person and this person. Well, what about polio? If they didn't have polio vaccinations, everybody be living in iron lungs. Well, polio vaccinations, we had those when I was 5. In 1965, those things existed. Those are tried and true. They've been around for 60-plus years. Chicken pox, same thing. All of this. So a brand new vaccine, I've got questions about it, especially when you hear a few horror stories. So what do you guys think? That's my take on that right now. I hope to have some answers. After I talk to my fellow father-in-law, I am going to report back what he has to say as a physician and as somebody whose practice has helped put all this together and has helped distributing it. So we'll see what gets said out there. And so I'll get back to you on that. I think it'll be interesting to find out what he has to say. He's obviously pro-vaccine, but I want to find out from somebody who is pro-vaccine, who's part of the physicians in the medical community, to see what he thinks about it. Now, my having had COVID, and my wife has it now, she's at the tail end of it, hopefully, knock on wood, is that I'm not supposed to be susceptible to getting it again for at least 90 days, possibly up to 2 years. Do I get vaccinated? Does a vaccination... Now, I have heard that the vaccination is something you have to have every year. It's kind of like the flu vax. Now, I've gotten the flu vaccination almost every year for the last 10 years. Not because I was worried about it or actively seeking it, but I would get the flu every year. And so, or something like the flu. I didn't even know if it was the flu every year. So I went into my doc and I said, should I get one of these? He goes, it's not going to hurt you. And so for 10 years, he's been giving me a flu vax. I had one this year. Maybe that's why my COVID isn't so bad. Maybe that's idiocy. Maybe it has nothing to do with each other. So I don't know. But there's years I haven't had the flu vax. And you know what? I've had the flu almost every other year for the last 10 years, even though I've had the vax almost all the time. So who knows what works and what doesn't? And do you need to get one every year? That's the thing. You get a polio vaccination, you know what? You're done for life. You never have to get one again. You get COVID vaccination, there's new strains that come out, we hear now. There's stuff that is unaffected by the vaccines. You may have to get the vaccine every year. So I don't really know. I want to know answers. I want answers to questions. I want to make sure it's not going to affect me on some kind of DNA level, which I've heard. So I'm listening to a podcast my daughter sent me, trying to get some information. And I'll talk to a physician about this, my fellow father-in-law, and I'll report back to you on it and honestly let you know what he has to say and what I hear and learn. So, there you go. Let's move on from that. We've been talking about the gift of the serpent, the idea that there is Gnostic interpretive to Old Testament, New Testament Scripture. That faith, reason, Gnosticism are three of those things that exist out there that are the answers, the responses we have as people trying to figure out our religion or our faith issues, the way we respond to these things. And so we've been looking at some of this, and it got pretty heavy-handed the other day, and it's going to be heavy-handed today. So I want you to get out your thinking caps and your iron panties and put them both on, because we're going to talk about this stuff a little more today, and it's a little bit in depth. Now remember, we talked about those three things: faith, reason, Gnosticism. Then we also talked about how those manifest also in a pre-modernist, modernist, and postmodernist thinking. So now, I want to look at, and we've talked about Gnosticism in the past, gaining knowledge, the mystical side of faith, if you will. Kind of a blending of intellectualism, mysticism, looking at Gnosticism. I say that I am an agnostic, meaning I have no knowledge. I don't really know what's true. And that's why I open up the door a little bit to examine some of these other ideas of thinking, ways of thinking, and approaching these things that are out there. So, let's talk a little bit about how to go toward a Gnostic modernism. All right? Now, given these two very fictive triads, the faith, reason, Gnosticism, and the modern, or pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, one might want to say that as a function of modernism and its cognitive dilemmas, they're very present cognitive dilemmas that we're aware of in this kind of thinking, that the study of religion shares in both kind of a pre-modern and modern form of consciousness. Remember, pre-modern, it's kind of set. It's what the faith says is what goes. Modernism is starting to question that a little bit and modify it into postmodern, which kind of is very skeptical. So it's a Gnosticism is a bit of this pre-modern and modern form of consciousness, even as it continually strives for something more or after, in effect, a kind of a Gnostic postmodernism. One might want to say that, but I'm not quite totally convinced that that's true yet, but I want us to examine this. Now, certainly much of what I'm going to attempt over this series and in some of these episodes we're going to talk about, you can look at this, and I'm going to attempt to frame, to be framed, or you could, how am I trying to say this? I'm going to attempt to be framed as postmodern, meaning a bit more skeptical, a bit more thinking, a bit more critical. For example, I see real mystical or Gnostic potential in the postmodern turn of things. I constantly engage in dialectical forms of inclusive thought that many would recognize as postmodern. And I also follow a certain postmodern convention, such as this deliberate mixing and merging of pre-modern and modern, or high and low, cultural forms. For example, Gnostics and comics. We're going to talk about that, believe it or not. And so other aspects of my thinking are distinctively modern in their form. And, for example, my comparative method insists on both sameness and difference across all human cultures and times. And I'm quite comfortable, as you've noticed, listening to anything I've had to say over the last couple of years. I'm quite comfortable speaking of comparative forms of things and structures, even of a certain ontology of this human being. And so I hesitate then moving back and forth among and within postmodern, modern, and pre-modern, modern, and postmodern forms of thought. And hence is this tentative parentheses, if you will, of my overall thrust on this, looking toward a Gnostic modernism. Okay? You start talking about this stuff and you can see how convoluted it can start to sound. So you got to listen very closely to this stuff to catch it. And maybe you already think this way. So it's intended to register this kind of ambivalent embrace of a postmodern way of thinking. Is kind of the way I look at it. A Gnostic or postmodern way of thinking. And I stumble here in 3 steps. 2 back, 1 forward. On the ethical and the mythical and the mystical. And ethically speaking, I can't quite shake the conviction. All right? And I'm hardly alone here that postmodernism's death of the subject and constructive leanings, which sometimes devolve into a complete relativism, that can too easily render any functional ethical position in the modern world intellectually impossible. So I stumble with that. I grapple with that. I struggle with that. Sometimes I am very stuck in the pre-modern, where I have convictions that are set and I fight against them because I say it can't be that way. That just can't be right. And so I look for a different way of thinking. The human being, the individual, gender equality, the notion of human rights might all be Western constructions. They're cosmic illusions, if you will, with no objective grounding that's out there. And these same convictions may also be in constant danger of morphing into an unthinking and arrogant cultural imperialism. Now, I say that when I've got friends that are postmodernist. They are completely skeptical, completely wanting to sterilize any notion of faith or reason out and go to the next step beyond that. And I find that that's a cultural imperialism. They say there is no God, there is no this, there is no that, and no, there is no that. This is the overtly skeptical types. Still, there are also these visions of our own enlightenment, these precious moral values, without which billions of individuals, most of them women and children and minorities, will almost certainly continue to suffer gross injustices, deprivation, disease, violence. And mythically speaking, postmodernism is certainly promising. And perhaps it's here as well that an incipient postmodern ethic can be best celebrated. As numerous authors have demonstrated throughout the decades, there are many historical and structural resonances between postmodern forms of deconstruction and traditional forms of religious thought, particularly Neoplatonic philosophy, medieval negative theology, and certain strands of apophatic mysticism. All of these systems of thought delight in demonstrating the self-contradictions and absurdities of traditional religious claims. I look at things and I say, the way I believe, the way I was brought up, the way I was taught, sometimes comes across in religion quite absurd. Is this the absurdity of, is this what was referred to in the Greek as the scandalon? The scandal of believing that Jesus is the Christ, that all these things we were taught were true. It's a stumbling block to those who think too much, in essence. It's like believe. The song that said, so surrender the hunger to say you must know. Have the courage to say I believe, for the power of paradox opens your eyes and blinds those who say they can see. So these are the absurdities sometimes where we step back and go, there's got to be something more solid than this. And that moves us into the postmodern way of thinking. These absurdities of traditional religious claims. And indeed of almost all linguistic utterances of this nature. So what postmodernism sometimes lacks, however, is precisely what the pre-modern practices possessed in rich abundance. And then in a sense, it's an ontological ground, or if you prefer, a non-ground into which the linguistic games and surface illusions can be dissolved. And perhaps even more important, a set of psychological contemplative techniques are incorporated to realize this non-ground. So, in a Meister Eckhart, or a Nagarjuna, if you want to pronounce the J, for example, truth claims are deconstructed into a godhead, beyond God, or into a meditative experience of infinite and brilliant emptiness. They've reduced the godhead to that. And in postmodernism, this isn't always so apparent. And one sometimes feels kind of lost in a kind of surface superficiality, or even this vague nihilism. And the same, by the way, has often been said about many forms of Buddhism. So if postmodern deconstruction of traditional religious thought, faith, reason, and values constitutes a contemporary mystical practice, it's still a young and very developing one, believe it or not. And so it's always good to question. Remember I mentioned Richard Feynman last week, the contemporary of Einstein and Oppenheimer. He says, to doubt and question, these are the things that drive me forward. And so in any case, it bears repeating. Postmodern acts of thought and of writing with respect to religion can be powerful ethical gestures, as they have the capacity to kind of melt down in the here and the now the oppressive dualisms of religious authority that are set up interminably, that delay salvation, liberation, or enlightenment, and so keep the authoritative structures of meditation and tradition solidly in place. I'm going to end that there for this first segment so we don't go over. Guys, you sit tight. We're going to come right back and pick this up right where we left off. Sit tight.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, welcome back to the Intrepid radio program. This is your host, Scotty Roberts. You're listening via Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. For those of you who aren't listening over there and just want to go hear the audio and look at some of the audio archives and see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. Or you can come on over to my YouTube channel and you can watch the video simulcast of this show, broadcasting right now, along with the live chat room going on right now. Come and join the live chat, talk about this program, talk about other things, share your life and your problems. Now, be a voyeur or be a participant. Either way, you're going to enjoy it. That's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we're talking about, we've really, in talking about this topic of the serpent's gift, which is kind of how we introduced this way of thinking. This looking at things from a very different perspective than we may have grown up learning, which may be very different from the traditional. In doing this, we start looking into the different ways we as culture approach the issues of theology and religion. And it can get very bogged down because we get deep into the philosophical. So I hope that you're enjoying where we're going with this. You got to listen a little closer to some of this stuff. It's a little deep. Maybe for some of you go, hey, that ain't deep at all. I get it. I'm flowing with it. I'm tracking with you. I follow. But maybe some of you are like, whoa, that's kind of heavy stuff. Well, that's what the chat room's for. Come on over, ask questions there, and just listen. Listen tightly. Like I say, put on your thinking caps and put on your iron panties, and let's forge forward a little bit. But before we do, I want to say go on over to my Etsy page, and you can see my Son of a Patriot merchandise. That's the merchandise for this show, for everything I do over here, and that's Son of a Patriot. And there he is. There's the logo, Son of a Patriot, that I put up on the YouTube screen. And I've told the story of him before. This little page is my effort to, there's Daughter of a Patriot. This is my effort to give you great patriotic type of merchandise. I'm not talking patriotic in the sense of what the left in this country is now starting to try to wipe out. I'm talking about patriotism, true patriotism, love of country, love of ideals, love of things constitutional, what the founding fathers put together. And so that's the kind of stuff I have over there. And the site kind of has a look like this. If you see this, these are some of the garments that are up there. Rainey's UFO shirt is up there. Her hop in, loser. We're doing butt stuff, I think is what it says. Also have different sayings and things that we've talked about on this show. Here's some more of the stuff that you can find over there. Here's Rainey's UFO shirt. Hop in, loser. We're doing butt stuff, it says. And that's all hers. Here's the Intrepid mug that I'm drinking. I'm not drinking out of today. So these are all the things you can find over there at my Etsy page. And that's etsy.com/shop/Son of a Patriot. Somebody is going to type that over into the chat room. So if you want to go over and click on it, you can do that. So go over and avail yourself of some of the merchandise we have there. We have T-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, for the most part. That's what we have. I want to start doing some other things, fun things like shower curtains. I'd like to have a shower curtain. I have to think of what I want to put on those. But there's a lot of these things that go along with a lot of the series that we've done on this show. So go avail yourself of that stuff. You'll find some good stuff to wear. Ask Leslie, ask Matt, ask a few other people over there in the chat room. They'll tell you what they think of the products. So that's it. That's my advertisement on that. So let's move on. We're talking about this whole thing on, it's really about enlightenment. It's Gnosticism, enlightenment, moving forward, trying to determine how we ought to be viewing things. I ended by saying that this all bears repeating, that postmodern acts of thought, of writing, with respect to religion, can be really powerfully ethical gestures, as they have the capacity to melt down in the here and now the oppressive dualisms of religious orthodoxy that are set up to interminably delay salvation, liberation, or enlightenment. And so keep the authoritative structures of meditation and tradition solidly in place. You realize that this all comes down to postmodern thinking. Gnostic thinking is one that's used to melt down the literalist orthodox way of thinking, which is what we've been embroiled in for about 1700 years or more. This thinking, and that was when the Catholic Church really overtook Gnosticism, pushed Gnosticism down, tried to kill it, and in essence did for many centuries. And the literalist orthodox point of view when it comes to theology is what was given us in its place. And what postmodern thinking, I believe, and Gnosticism do, is they melt away all the trappings of that literalist orthodoxy, which is really set up to delay your thinking. You have to filter all your thinking through the literalist orthodoxy. And so this is what I want you to think about. And just as important, they also demonstrate this profound and really quite radical respect for otherness. You get that? It's a lack of respect. I'm sorry, a profound respect for otherness and differences. And so easily it morphs into intellectually grounded forms of social activism with respect to people of color, women, gays, lesbian, former colonized people. All of this stuff fits under that picture, believe it or not. And so having acknowledged all of that, I want to register one final doubt, one more step backward from a standard postmodernism. Mythically speaking, I can't help but read postmodernism's challenge to such things as the comparative method, to grand theorizing in the humanities or the social sciences, and to modern science as the reappearance of the petty god of Genesis. That's threatening the beautiful couple for their erotic desire to know one another and to awaken to a morally mature form of consciousness. If Immanuel Kant's Enlightenment shouts, "Dare to know!" the motto of postmodernism sometimes becomes, "How dare you know?" Because postmodernism starts to challenge anything where we say we can know something for sure. So that gives me a doubt to postmodernist thinking. And this seems particularly apparent in certain deformations or abuses of this kind of what I would call post-colonial theory, where any strong claim to comparative psychological or historical knowledge is too often facilely framed as a form of epistemological imperialism or this neo-colonialism. And its knowledge has in effect become a form of evil. Getting more knowledge about something is evil. Notice that? You think too much. Stop thinking so much. When I talked about the Nephilim, how I brought up those questions about language. We say language means something. What does this actually mean? Scotty, you're thinking too much. You're thinking too hard. We don't have to go there. We don't believe that. And so on. So shut down thinking. So knowledge has in effect become a form of evil in postmodernism too, because we say, stop all of that stuff. You don't have to have that knowledge. And the petty god of Genesis is now joined by the petty gods of every other religion and culture and scientific mode of thinking that exists in our culture. And it's a desperate attempt to keep us all locked within 1,000 pre-modern gardens of imagined ethic. Ethnic, religious, and political purity. I can think of a few worlds more dangerous than this one. That's dangerous thinking as far as I'm concerned. And so I think that we have that possibility of lapsing right back into pre-modernism with postmodernism. See how sometimes philosophy can come back and bite its own tail. Let's look at meditations. What then can I finally say about all of these terms and their relationships to the study of religion? I can say that whereas the public faces of the studies of religion have alternated all back and forth between visages of faith and reason, and the field, in fact, encompasses, and has always encompassed, faith, reason, and gnosis, in both its history, in its philosophical structures, even as it now attempts to move beyond all three into this uniquely postmodern form of consciousness, for which there are many precedents. There's echoes of embarrassment, as Ilse Bulloff and Lawrence Tenkate so beautifully put it with respect to the Western history of negative theology. But nothing quite like this. For my own part, I want to read our present postmodernism, and especially this particular study of religion that we're doing, as a deeply Gnostic phenomenon, a knowing phenomenon, a gaining knowledge phenomenon that cannot be properly appreciated, much less fully realized, without engaging its deconstructive, apophatic, and implicitly mystical dimensions. Get that? There's that key word. Mystical dimensions. What do I mean by this? In other words, what I'm saying here is that without in any way denying the relationship of the discipline to the history of your faith, or for that matter to a deeply ambiguous history of colonialism, or its central reliance on reason and doubt as methods of inquiry, I want to emphasize in the following 4 meditations its positive, transformative, experiential, intuitive, and Gnostic powers. I want to discover things, and I want to know things. And if you will, some of the mystical depths of our modern enlightenment and its attending humanism, as well as those of our more recent postmodern turn in our culture itself is so deeply indebted to that same enlightenment. So postmodernism here, then, is not so much a denial of faith and reason, or rejection of modernism, or sameness or form, as it's its own Gnostic radicalization and awakening. It all comes back to being awake in the most simplistic of terms. So what I'm not doing is rejecting the reductive methods in social scientific scholarship of contemporary academy. Neither am I suggesting a simple resolution of the tensions between faith and reason via Gnosis. That is not an easy resolution. Those two trains heading headlong toward each other on the same track, that's not an easy resolution. And so, nor am I seeking to equate ancient Gnosticism and modern religion and studies of modern religion in any kind of facile or non-reflective way. I'm perfectly aware that I am employing the trope of Gnosticism in a very rhetorical and essentially theological way to advance my own intellectual agenda. And so I'm also aware that I'm writing in the shadow, really in the light, of an impressive corpus of scholarship that's produced by previous writers, previous pundits, previous speakers. This is how I put this stuff forward. This is not new stuff. It's my interpretive of it. It's my refining of it, if you will, distilling of information. And And sometimes they do this in much greater detail than I'm doing it here. This is kind of watered down. And they have to come to evaluate conclusions different from my own. I'm not exactly arguing for what somebody like a Cyril O'Regan calls a Gnostic return to modernism, which is in effect also a kind of a haunting. Although I'm awed by O'Regan's erudition, and I share a lot of things that his ambivalence is about Gnosticism, my specific intellectual framing of a Gnostic epistemology. It's generally more positive than his. It's more erotic at times, and I don't mean that to sound sexually erotic, but erotic has to do with the sexual form of us. And it's not dependent in any way on the mythological structures of the whole Valentinian Gnosis, or the theosophical system. Think theosophy, you think of Madame Blavatsky, and the things that became the pre-Thule, the pre-Nazi ways of thinking incorporated all of her stuff into it. But that theosophical system of the Boheme. And it's also much more engaged with kind of Asian ways of thinking, believe it or not, Far Eastern. So my model, at least, the postmodern Gnostic intellectual is the one who privileges knowledge over belief. Now, how many times have I said to you, I don't want to believe something, I want to know something. Let's say, we'll use just a very simplistic example. If you believe there is life after death and you go to either heaven or hell based on any number of criteria, based on just the salvific nature of a Christ, you believe these things. I don't want to believe those things. I want to know those things. If I'm going to put my faith in something, and of course, it's very paradoxical to say it this way, if I'm going to put my faith in something, I want to know what it is I'm putting my faith in. If I'm going to walk a rickety rope bridge over a 1,000-foot deep chasm, I want to know that rope bridge is going to hold my weight. Now, could I walk out there on faith and go, well, I was told it would do it? Maybe I'd just end up taking a different route. I don't know. But that's what I'm talking about. The intellectual, I think the true intellectual, the true Gnostic intellectual, is the person who privileges knowledge above belief systems. And who knows that... Hold on. Woo, I hate doing that. Boy, oh boy. Just got coffee on my keyboard. So, sorry about that, folks. Look at that. I just, how's that for professionalism? And let me just wipe some coffee off of my keyboard before I go much further. But wouldn't you rather know something than just believe something because this is what you were told to do? That's the same with me. I don't want to be told something. You know, the only time I want to be told is if I go, I am coming to you and I want your knowledge. Tell me what you have. Tell me what I should glean from what you're going to teach me. And then I will decide whether or not that's true. I don't want clean keyboard. Ba-da-da-da. And so I don't want somebody telling me that this is what I need to believe, say, for eternal destiny. That's theology. Don't tell me what I'm supposed to believe and then say, now go out and believe that. I want to know why I should believe that, especially when there is more than one way to thinking about things. So there's the big quandary. So the intellectual is somebody who privileges knowledge over belief, who knows that he or she knows, and knows what that what they know, that what they know can't possibly be reconciled with the claims of any past or present religious tradition, including the ancient Gnostic Judaisms, and the Christianities, and the Muslimisms, and all of these things. Those are all common radical dualisms, and consistent with rejections of the body, sexuality, physical world render any simplistic mimicking of these elaborate mythological systems quite impossibly and hardly desirable. I can only believe these things if I enter into certain denials of who and what I am. That's problematic for me. So I'm made this way, but I got to deny the way I'm made in order to believe this. And that doesn't mean we don't have moral compasses or anything like that, but hopefully you get where I'm going with that. And so to borrow an expression from Elaine Pagels, such a Gnostic epistemology or way of knowing is quite literally beyond belief. I want to go beyond belief and I want to know. It's also, however, quite beyond reason. At least if we restrict reason to the reductive socio-politicals of, say, a Marxism, of much humanities scholarship, the quantitative models of the social sciences, or the extreme relativisms of some postmodern ways of thinking. I would argue that the former rationalisms are simply incapable of dealing adequately with that immense swath of non-rational, altered states of consciousness and energy that constitute so much of the history of religions, and that the latter postmodernist relativisms too easily devolve into an effective denial of reason in which truth is collapsed into identity. Knowledge has become mere opinion, and all opinions are more or less equal. And as my mom used to say, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. And so the result is this intellectual chaos. It's moral relativism. You know what relativism is? The new relativism is that there are no things that are relative. The new absolutism is that there is no absolutes. Relativism is what's good for you may not be good for me, but I got my thing that's good for me and it might not be good for you. It's relative. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or my reality is based on my perception. Things like that. That's relativism. And so I would argue that the former rationalisms are simply incapable of dealing adequately with that immense swath of non-rational altered states of consciousness and energy that constitute so much of the history of religion and the history of theology, the history of orthodox literalist theology. The result is intellectual chaos. It's moral relativism. It's the resurgence of fundamentalist and fascist forms. Fascist. Every time I say that word, that's the way it wants to come up now. Fascist. You're such a fascist. No, but fundamentalism and fascism, these forms of religious nationalisms, from Indiana to India, all around the world, that draw on these very postmodern models to justify their own identity politics and their rejection of both critical hermeneutics of the humanities and the universality of modern science. And so in Miranda's telling phrase, postmodern theorists and their fundamentalist fans can easily become prophets that are facing backwards. So the form of postmodern consciousness that I'm attempting to theorize here is not any of these things. It's not a pure, untroubled reason that refuses to think a thought that can't be quantified or falsified or reproduced in a controlled laboratory. There's little controlled or even controllable about religious experience, by the way. So neither, however, is it anti-reason. Even if it sees the limitations of a strictly conceived rationality, it's not anti-modern. Even if it, I'm using modern as the terms of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern ways of thinking. It's not anti-modern. Even if it often feels restricted and unnecessarily bound in this by modern forms of thought and being fully cognizant that the dark sides of modernism exist. It's not relativistic. It doesn't depend on the way you think. It's not relative. Even if it embraces both deconstruction and pluralism as these necessary methods and values of conducting ourselves when it comes to faith and practice, and belief and non-belief. Even if it recognizes its own fallibility and limited sight, it's not antibody, it's not anti-cosmos, as so many of the ancient Gnostics were. On the contrary, it turns to the body, the self, and in particular to sometimes the erotic body. Take that the right way. Don't go crazy over there in the chat room now. You can talk about erotic bodies. But hear me on this. It turns to the erotic body as a source of wisdom and delight as the fundamental ground of its comparative theorizing. The human universals of biology, physiology, gender, sexuality, infinitely permutated through local doctrine, social practice, language, define the parameters of the corpus mysticism, the body of mysticism I'm talking about here, and its constant universal dialectic of difference and sameness, which seems paradoxical, differences and samenesses. And perhaps most important, however, the form of Gnosis that I'm arguing for here claims to know things that other forms of knowledge and experience, like traditional faith or pure reason, don't, and probably cannot ever know, even as it submits its claims to public review, to criticism, to renewal, all of which listens and responds to as some of its own important ethical acts. So too simply, but instructively put, the study of religion has been defined by a kind of a ping-pong movement between two modes of human functioning, two sides of the brain, left and right brain as it were, analogous but not identical to those associated with faith and reason. Thus, we're told that the study of religion should be about faithful description and comparison of worldviews as members of these cultures might recognize them, a kind of a cultural cheerleading. Come on, you can do it. Or we're told that the study of religion should be about explaining religious myths and rituals and beliefs in the non-religious terms of the natural and social sciences. That is, reduced to the entirely secular processes of the psyche, society, and political control. So it's this kind of heartless deconstruction. So much of the discussion has proceeded on the assumptions that what we have here is kind of a zero-sum game. And so we're going to talk about this more. We're out of time tonight. Hope you're getting this and flowing with me on this. We're going to talk about more of this tomorrow. And so you sit tight and take a 23-hour break, and we'll be right back.